Hi everyone! Today I'm going to give a short overview of the appointed representatives regime. This is an important topic for fintechs, as in some circumstances it can avoid the need for full regulatory authorisation and can therefore be the fastest route to market when launching a regulated product or when starting to carry on regulated activities in the UK. Often, new businesses or businesses entering into the regulated space for the first time use the appointed representatives regime either as part of their long-term strategy or more often in the short to medium term whilst they launch their product and test their business. Whilst becoming an AR of a regulated principal can have some disadvantages over the longer term, in the short term it's much cheaper and faster than obtaining an independent regulatory authorisation. So, in this video, I'm going to discuss what is an AR, the practical steps to become an AR, the considerations and responsibilities that you should have after becoming an AR, and just some top tips. So, an appointed representative is a firm or individual that operates under the regulatory umbrella of another principal firm. This means that the appointed representative, or AR, can carry out regulated activities that it essentially borrows from the principal without direct authorisation from the FCA. The AR regime applies to various types of regulatory activity, including certain investment services activities and insurance activities. It's worth noting that the AR regime does not apply in the payments and e-money space, but there's a slightly different but fairly similar agency type regime that operates instead. There are, however, some important limitations that apply to the AR regime. Firstly, some regulated activities can never be performed by ARs. So, for example, you can't accept deposits as an AR. Secondly, an AR is limited to the permissions of its principal. This means that an AR cannot do more than what its principal is authorised to do. Finally, an AR cannot exceed the scope of its appointment. This means that an AR can only carry out the regulated activities that it actually borrows from the principal, as set out in the AR agreement between the two. So, as a prospective AR, it's important that you consider at the outset A, what regulatory permissions you will need, and B, whether you can actually borrow those from your chosen principal. So the first step is to identify your chosen principal, and to make sure that they have the regulatory permissions that you require, as well as being of good repute and not under any kind of investigation from the FCA. You will then need to draft and negotiate the AR agreement that meets the relevant regulatory requirements. This is something we can help with, and whilst a principal will often provide the first draft of the agreement, this is a critical document and we'd always recommend that the AR does their own internal review. You should expect that you'll need to provide detailed information to the principal on your firm's details, activities, senior managers, and financial standing before the signing of the AR agreement and on an ongoing basis. This is because your principal will be required to provide certain information on you to the FCA and will also have an ongoing obligation to oversee your activities. Your principal will also need to notify the FCA of your appointment as an AR. This needs to be done at least 30 days in advance of your appointment. You will then be listed as an AR on the UK Financial Services Register and can start carrying on the relevant activities. Now to move to the considerations and responsibilities that you'll have after becoming an AR. After becoming an AR, there are a few things you must keep in mind. Firstly, you may not exceed the scope of your AR appointment. If you do act outside the scope of your appointment, as set out in your AR agreement, it's unlikely that you'll be able to blame this on your regulatory principal. This means, for example, that if you launch a new product or if you amend an existing one, you should take advice to make sure that you don't commit any kind of regulatory breach. Secondly, you'll need to comply with the contractual obligations set out in your AR agreement. This might include adhering to your principal's policies and procedures, maintaining records for compliance, enabling access to your business for the principal in order that they can adequately oversee you and take responsibility for your regulatory compliance, and notifying the principal of any changes to your business. There are a few other things to bear in mind. So it's possible to be the AR of more than one regulated principal, but specific detailed rules apply that you should consider. and it's also possible for a principal to have more than one AR. The AR regime is currently under scrutiny. In December 2022, the FCA introduced additional rules and guidance to improve how principals oversee their ARs, and is continuing to take an active interest in this area. If your principal thinks that it cannot effectively oversee your business, it will terminate the AR agreement. So it's really important to communicate regularly with your principal. And if your principal loses some or all of its regulatory permissions or is under any kind of FCA investigation, this may impact your business. So, to sum up, my top tips for becoming an AR are: first, choose a reliable authorised principal and make sure that its suite of permissions covers your proposed business. This is really important and something that we advise on frequently, so do get in touch if you need support with this. Secondly, carefully scrutinise the AR agreement. Again, this is certainly something we can help with. And third of all, plan for ongoing regulatory compliance. Your principal should certainly support you with this, but it's not something that you can wholly delegate to them and forget about. And finally, I'd say in the longer term, do consider whether it's worth obtaining your own independent authorisation. So, that's a very quick overview on becoming an AR. If you need any further guidance or support, please do get in touch.